Hello, my name is Avery Taylor, and today I'll be grading every single Major League Baseball team's trade deadline. Some teams went in, some teams didn't, and we're going to be giving a grade for each and every one of them. So let's go ahead and get into it. Starting with the Chicago Cubs, I think they're a team that should have went more all in into this season. You don't know if you're getting Kyle Tucker back, so you really have to take advantage of the season that you're having. And this not to say they got bad players, but I definitely think they should have went more all in, especially with their loaded prospect system. I just think that a return of Andrew Kittredge, Taylor Rogers, Willie Castro, and Michael Soroka isn't necessarily the haul of players that turns this team into a World Series favorite. I just think that they could have done more, so I gave them a D plus. And it's kind of a similar thing here with the Texas Rangers, who again had a pretty minimal impact at the trade deadline. They grabbed Danny Colombi, Merrill Kelly, and Phil Maton, but nothing that really blows you away, nothing that pushes this team that much further ahead than where they were before. With that being said, they did have less tools to work with, and I would say less expectations, considering they're not a World Series contender, in my opinion. Maybe a long shot, but they're not a favorite like the Cubs, so I gave them a C. For the Colorado Rockies, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but they did get a pretty good return back from Jake Bird and Ryan McMahon in their trades with the Yankees. I think they did pretty well to get back who they did, so I gave them a C+. Fourth team on the list is the Tampa Bay Rays, who continue to confuse the ever-living crap out of me with every decision they make. Trading away Zach Little kind of made sense. I get it. He's going to be essentially a rental for the Cincinnati Reds. That's fine. But then you turn around and trade for Adrian Hauser, who is also a rental guy from the White Sox. In that trade, you gave up Curtis Mead, who is a former top prospect. He's not that far removed from it. He's yet to hit that ceiling, sure, but I don't think it was time to give up on Curtis Mead quite yet. And then you turn around, you grab Griffin Jacks, which I think was a really great move. You give up Taj Bradley in the process, but the Rays always churn out good pitching, so I'm not too worried about it. But Griffin Jacks is an elite stud. Hopefully, he can get that ERA down because he needs to get the respect he deserves. But I just felt like this trade deadline was kind of all over the place for me. So I gave them a C minus, but knowing the Rays, it'll work out perfectly for them. Speaking of confusing, here at number 5, we have the Boston Red Sox, who essentially traded Rafael Devers for 2 months of Dustin May, who's coming off Tommy John surgery. Yeah, that's not a great look. Whenever they traded for Rafael Devers, the guy they got back was James Tibbs, who was a solid prospect, top 100 guy, and then you traded him to the Dodgers for 2 months of Dustin May whenever he's not at his peak. Like I don't understand that in the slightest. And then they traded for Steven Matz and gave away the GOAT Blaze Jordan. Like, what are we doing? Seriously, like we're in the playoff picture. We are well within that, reach of making the playoffs, being a wild card team. Even if you made a serious push for the division, who knows? But wild card is definitely within the picture, and they didn't necessarily go out and make moves that made their team that much better, in my opinion. And I thought it was really underwhelming, so I gave them a D plus. For the Minnesota Twins, it's really hard to quantify how much value they got back versus how much they gave up, because who needs a bullpen? Am I right? Like, let's just give them all away. Johan Duran gone, Brock Stewart gone, Danny Colombi gone, Griffin Jacks gone, Louis Varland gone. Who needs them? Who needs them? But in all seriousness, they did do pretty well in their returns. They got Eduardo Tait from the Phillies, Mick Abel in that same trade, got Jimenez, Mendez, Gallagher, Rojas to add to this ever building farm system that's just getting ridiculous. Taj Bradley as a under the radar sort of rotation ad as well. I thought they did okay in their returns. And then I hated the Carlos Correa trade. I understand that the contract hasn't worked out for you. He's been often hurt. He hasn't produced at the level you would hope. And to just give him away to the Astros and eat some of the salary is just, it's kind of criminal to me. I think you just kind of have to eat it and wait that out and hope for the best, because giving him back to the Astros, where I just had this sick feeling that he's going to turn into a stud again, is kind of scary. And I don't love that from the Twins. So I gave them a B because I thought they did well getting prospects back, but the Carlos Correa trade really hurt me and my soul. At number 7, we have the St. Louis Cardinals, who just kind of had a run-of-the-mill trade deadline, in my opinion. They got rid of Ryan Helsley. They got back Jesus Baez from the Mets. Also got back Nate Dom. Blaze Jordan from the Boston Red Sox. Let's go. They got the GOAT. But all in all, it was a fine trade deadline. They got rid of a bunch of relievers and Eric Fede. They also didn't really get like a ton back. It was just kind of fine, so I gave them a C. My notes for the Cleveland Guardians was boring, Nothing really to talk about. Okay, well, I guess we won't talk about them that much. They got their number 7 prospect from the Toronto Blue Jays in exchange for Shane Bieber, who's yet to pitch for them in hardly the last 2 years. They gave away Paul Sewald for basically nothing. Not much to talk about. Let's give him a C minus. The ninth team on the list today is the Cincinnati Reds, and I actually didn't mind their trade deadline. I thought getting Brian Hayes was a good value move. I think he's probably about at the lowest value he's going to be just because he has not hit in a long time. And I do think that's part of being in Pittsburgh, being behind the 8 ball as a right handed hitter who struggles to lift the ball. I think you're always going to struggle in Pittsburgh in that sort of scenario. Going to Cincinnati, I think, will help him out greatly. Zach Little is an absolute stud. It is a rental, but if you're the Reds, you didn't really give up too much in that trade, and I think it's well worth your investment. And the same thing with Miguel Andujar, not necessarily the guy that his name maybe carries, but he is just a solid rental. If he pops off, great. If not, you're not out that much anyway. I thought it was some pretty good sneaky pickups. I didn't love them moving off Taylor Rogers in that Pittsburgh trade. Taylor Rogers is an absolute stud from the bullpen, but I didn't love it. I know it was a salary dump. They wanted to even things out with Brian Hayes, but I didn't love the move, so that's why I'm going to give them a B. It would have been higher otherwise. For the Washington Nationals, it was also a very sneaky sort of deadline for them, and I thought they did pretty well. Like, they added a lot of depth to the system, got their number 10, 11, 12, 13th prospect back from this trade group that I didn't really think was that stacked. I mean, Kyle Finnegan's probably your headliner, Michael Soroka, Alex Call. Like, none of these guys I think are super duper game changers by any means. So I gave them a B because they didn't really give up a whole lot and they added a lot of prospect depth. Another team's deadline that just had me kind of puzzled was the Atlanta Braves. They just kind of sat in limbo and didn't really do a whole lot. They got a bunch of marginal pitching. They got Dane Dunning, Eric Fede, Carlos Carrasco, guys that are just kind of hanging on, throwing some innings for them. They didn't trade anybody away and get prospects back. Like, they just kind of sat and did nothing. How they didn't trade Marcell Ozuna is kind of baffling to me because his contract ends at the end of the year. Sure, he's only a DH and he has a rough past. We'll just say that. But he definitely should have been moved. Like, this is a guy that can definitely fetch you some sort of prospect back. And this Brave system isn't the strongest. It could definitely use some prospects. And to not trade Ozuna, I think, is kind of criminal. So I gave them a D. The 12th team on the list is the Detroit Tigers, who had the opposite approach to their counterparts within the division, the Minnesota Twins, where they just grabbed every pitcher they could. They added 7 pitchers in this deadline, and I don't know that any of them are like game changing. They grabbed Paul Sewald, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero, Chris Paddock, Randy Dobnak, Charlie Morton. None of these names scream out to you as great pieces to grab at the deadline, but if you throw enough people at the problem, maybe it'll fix. I gave them a C plus for at least acknowledging their issue, but yeah, not the greatest group of guys to bring in my opinion. But they at least tried. That's more than we can say for the Milwaukee Brewers. Has anybody told them that they are in first place, literally the best record in baseball right now? Has anybody told them that? What were they doing? Serious, like Danny Jansen, Brandon Lockridge, and Shelby Miller. Sure, they grabbed Jordan Montgomery, who's not going to pitch for them and was just a pure salary dump. Yay! What is this group that they brought in? Like, I get it's the Brewers. They don't really make moves like that, but you have to invest in this team and reward them for playing so well. Like, this was criminal in my opinion. I gave them the lone F for the video. For the Los Angeles Angels, yeah, this was another check the notes thing, and I said lame with 5 exclamation points. Mike Trout isn't getting any younger. Neutral isn't progress. Yeah, they grabbed a couple good relievers. Luis Garcia, Andrew Chafin's having a good year, but I just don't see how this team doesn't grab any like big name starting pitcher or a really solid bullpen option that's like a big name. Like, how they don't invest in them, I don't know. To be fair, they don't have the prospects to do it, but I was really underwhelmed by this trade deadline by the Angels, so I gave them a D. For the San Francisco Giants, they kind of just traded off who they needed to. They got rid of Tyler Rogers, they got rid of Mike Yastrzemski, but then they also got rid of Camilo Doval, who had a couple years left on his deal, and I thought the return from that trade in specific was kind of underwhelming, only getting back like a 12 and 13 into your prospect system whenever we've seen some of the other returns that the relievers have gotten was kind of disappointing in my opinion, but the rest was relatively fine. I thought they kind of just handled things the way they should, so I gave them like a C minus. 16th team on the list is the San Diego Padres, who really were a tough team for me to grade because I do love a team that goes all in. And I think getting a superstar like Mason Miller at the back end of that bullpen, not that they needed it because that bullpen's electric, but Mason Miller just makes this bullpen even more stacked than it already was, which is hard to imagine. But Mason Miller is that guy. But so is Leo DeVries. Like, I cannot believe they traded him for just a reliever. Like, I know Mason Miller is not just a reliever, he's an absolute stud, but trading that high of a prospect for a reliever is kind of hard to imagine for me. And then they also gave up their 5th prospect, the 9th prospect, and their 17th prospect within the system. That's a lot for what they got back. I know Mason Miller is a dog, but that's a lot for a reliever and the starting pitcher. And then they also gave up Boston Bateman, their number 6 prospect, to the Baltimore Orioles. I thought that was justified. Now, Ryan O'Hearn started out the year blazing hot, and he really hasn't been that same guy over the last 2 months. He's kind of been coming down to earth, so that trade also scares me a little bit. But I'm going to stick to my core. I'm going to give them an A minus because I love that they went for it. But this trade deadline, it has me worried a little bit because it definitely could backfire. At number 17, we have the Houston Astros, who didn't necessarily make the superstar play in this trade deadline. They didn't necessarily go and get a guy with as guaranteed upside as the San Diego Padres did, but I love the moves that they made. Jesus Sanchez is a really underrated piece, and I think if the right team can tap into his potential, and I think the Astros are the team to do it, I think he could definitely be a star within this league. Carlos Correa, him going back to Houston just feels right to me. I just think moving him to third base, letting him kind of relax on the defensive side and just focus on offense, get him back to pulling the ball in the Crawford boxes. I just think it just feels right for Carlos Correa to be back in Houston. I don't know if it's just a nostalgia thing, but it just feels right. And then Ramon Urias, sure, he's a decent player, but they really didn't give up that much for these players. And I just think that they didn't give up a whole lot. And a lot of these players could bring back big returns, so I gave them an A minus. It's aggressive, I know, but I liked what they did at the deadline. The 18th team of the list is the Toronto Blue Jays, who made some solid moves. They grabbed Louis Varland, Sir Anthony Dominguez, adding to this bullpen that already was pretty stacked to begin with. They also went out and grabbed Shane Bieber. This was a interesting move to me because I think it's like a really big hit or miss move, because coming back off Tommy John is always a super kind of hit or miss thing. Like, it's never a guaranteed thing that they're going to come back in their first year and be fully healthy, ready to go. Sometimes pitchers just take a bit longer to ease into it, so it puts a lot of stress on him to come back and be healthy because they're going to throw him probably right into the mix to try to help them make this playoff push. So I think that's, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's going to look really bad and they're going to wish they went somewhere else. But I like it to some degree, so I gave them a B minus. For the New York Mets, I thought they did pretty solid. They addressed their bullpen needs pretty heavily, grabbing Gregory Soto, Tyler Rogers, Ryan Helsley. They even got a center fielder in Cedric Mullins to help shore up their outfield. They just made a lot of moves that made sense. They did give up a good bit in that same vein. They gave up 4 guys within their top 15 prospects. So I thought they gave up a little bit too much, and they didn't necessarily add a true superstar. So I gave them a B+, but it was just a solid deadline for the Mets. The Pittsburgh Pirates literally made me want to claw my own eyes out as I watched the trades come through. As you may know, I'm a Pirates fan, and this was the most disappointing day to watch in a long time, and I've had to watch Pirates baseball for a long time as well. Not only did they give up on the prolonged future of David Bednar, who is under contract for 2 more or a year and a half at least, Brian Hayes, who's under contract for a long time. Sure, he's never hit the ceiling, he might, but you had him for a while. You gave up on Bailey Falter too. I'm not a Bailey Falter believer, but he's still got years on his contract. And you kept Andrew Heaney, you kept Tommy Pham, and you kept Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, whose contracts all end at the end of the year. What are we doing? What do you, seriously, I don't even care what they got back. Sammy Stafuro, sure, he's going to be fine. He's a ways away from the majors. What are we doing? What are you doing? Seriously, If you're going to do that, I feel like you have to commit to it. Like you have to commit to just tearing the whole thing down. You can't just half see it and trade away half the people that you have control over and not all of them. And you certainly cannot leave the guys that are on expiring contracts on this roster. Surely you trade them away and surely you get the maximum value back. If that's your goal to tear things down, sure. But the GM has constantly stated that this team's goal is to compete next year. Why are you trading away David Bednar? Why are you trading away guys that are under contract for next year that give you some stability at positions? I don't understand the logic behind this trade deadline. I gave them a D minus, and it was really hard not to give them an F. The Chicago White Sox, they really didn't do a whole lot. They traded away Adrian Hauser, they traded away Austin Slater, didn't really get a lot back, but I think the move that they did make that really propelled me to give them a positive grade was Curtis Mead. I thought getting Curtis Mead, a guy that's just freshly off being a top prospect, hasn't really showed at the major league level, but you're the White Sox, you haven't really built too much yet. And I think getting a guy that was a former top prospect, give him a chance and see what he turns out to be. I think that's an excellent move by the White Sox, so I gave them a C+. For the Miami Marlins, they really didn't do a whole lot either. They traded away Nick Fortes and Jesus Sanchez. As I've previously said, I am a believer in Sanchez, but based off what he's done on the field so far in his career, this isn't really that big of a loss. They only got back one prospect within their top 30, so it was just a ho-hum trade deadline. I gave him a C. At number 23, we had the Los Angeles Dodgers, who weirdly had a pretty under the radar sort of trade deadline. Like I normally think of the Dodgers, I think of the flashy money. They're constantly trading for guys. Like I always think of them going over the top for things, but they really didn't do a whole lot in this deadline. Traded for Alex Call, sure, from the Washington Nationals. They got two relievers who I'm pretty gassed on from Minnesota and Tampa Bay. And then somehow they ended up with James Tibbs at the end of the day, which kind of feels like they're future proofing this team as well. So it feels like they all around got better, I would say, but it wasn't necessarily the flashy moves that we come to expect with the Dodgers. I gave them a B minus just because it wasn't like overwhelming moves that make them even better of a team, even though I don't even know how that's possible. But I gave them a B minus. Thought it was a solid deadline. The Arizona Diamondbacks were in the news pretty early on and often for trading away some of their big name stars, Eugenio Suarez, Josh Naylor, Merrill Kelly, Shelby Miller, and the GOAT of Arizona, Jordan Montgomery. But I was really kind of disappointed in their returns. They didn't really get a top 100 guy. They didn't really get a guy that I think is going to make a clear difference on this roster. I think Tyler Locklear would definitely get the opportunity to shut my mouth. But other than that, like Cole Drake is a solid prospect, but then it really kind of has a fall off from there. Like I just wasn't overwhelmed by their returns that they got on their trades. I thought they did the right thing in trading who they traded, but I didn't think they got the returns that they needed to have a really good grade, so I gave them a C minus. For the Philadelphia Phillies, I thought they made all the moves that made perfect sense. They got Johan Duran, they traded for Harrison Bader, an outfielder who has a semblance of a bat, and then they got Matt Manning, sure, Adam in the bullpen. I love what they did. They did give up a lot for Johan Duran. Not to say he's not worth it, but they did give up a lot, so I did knock them a little bit. I gave them an A minus. For Seattle, I loved what they did at the deadline. It wasn't like a bunch of moves, but they made three really solid moves, in my opinion, grabbing Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Loved those moves. I think bringing Eugenio Suarez back to Seattle was a good move. Josh Naylor, solid first baseman. I think adding more bats to this lineup, we know that the pitching's probably going to rebound and be just absolutely lights out. This is a team that's built, I think, for success not only in the regular season, but the postseason. I really hope they make a run because this team is starting to round out into something special. And then I didn't really think they gave up a whole lot. I think you can live with Tyler Locklear moving on. And then other than that, Ashton Izzy. But like, there's nothing that I'm like focused on that I'm like, oh man, how could they give that up? I gave them an A. The New York Yankees, I gave them the lone A+ of the video. I think they addressed all of their needs and did so while actually future-proofing the team as well. Ryan McMahon, I'm a big believer in, plays really solid defense, put his bat into New York. I think he's going to turn into a really solid player, probably a star. And then you have David Bednar you bring in Camilo Duvall, and they also brought in Jake Bird. All three of those relievers have this year and next year at least on their contracts, and even further for some of them. Like, they future-proofed their bullpen. They're going to have some big contracts come up at the end of the year, namely Devin Williams. But they future-proofed the bullpen while also grabbing stars in the process. And I wouldn't say they gave up a lot. They held on to their top guys within their prospect system. I thought they just absolutely crushed the deadline. I gave them the A+ of the video. And then at number 29, we had the Baltimore Orioles, who I think just kind of did everything they needed to do. They got rid of all their expiring contracts, Cedric Mullins, Ryan O'Hearn, Andrew Kittredge. They just kind of did what they needed to do, and they got back decent returns. They got 2 prospects within the top 10 of their system, helped rebuild some of the depth and within that system that they've lost over the years. So I went ahead and gave them a B. And then to round things out with the Kansas City Royals, I wasn't necessarily overwhelmed with how great their deadline was. I think this should have been a deadline for them to add bats and try to push into that serious playoff contenders, serious maybe dark horse World Series team, and they just really didn't do that. Mike Yastrzemski is a solid addition. He's going to really help out their corner outfield, which was desperate for help. Adam Frazier going to get a lot of playing time at second base. I don't love that. Bailey Falter, I'm sure, will be fine, but it just wasn't the trade deadline, I think, that pushed the needle for him, so I gave them a C-. And that's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for the support on the channel over the recent months. It's been absolutely amazing to put out content for you all and have it be received so well, so I really do appreciate it. Let me know what you think of my grades down below. Try to keep it relatively respectful, and as always, have a great day.